He was 17 for exactly 4 hours before he became homeless. A brother cast out on the day he was meant to become a man, taking his sister with him, their only crime being that they had ceased to be a legal obligation. What they would find under the floor of their grandparents' forgotten barn wasn't just shelter. It was a truth that would change the entire story of their family. And if you've ever felt like your own story was written by someone else, like you were just a character with no say in the plot, then maybe stick around. Hit that subscribe button, because this is a place for people who have had to find a way to write their own ending. The lock on Aunt Carol's front door clicked shut with a sound like a bone snapping. It was a clean, final sound. The sound of an ending. I stood on the porch, the November air so cold it felt like a physical slap, and watched my breath turn to smoke. Beside me, my sister Maya clutched the strap of her duffel bag, her knuckles white. She was 15, all sharp angles and quiet fear, and my only job in the world was to keep that fear from swallowing her whole. "She really did it," Maya whispered, her voice small against the wind that whipped around the corner of the meticulously kept suburban house. "I know," I said. The words felt useless, brittle. Inside, the light in the hallway went out. Aunt Carol was already moving on, erasing us. 2 years she'd been our guardian, ever since the accident that took our parents. 2 years of us being the unwelcome ghosts at her dinner table, the financial burden she never failed to mention in hushed, angry phone calls she thought we couldn't hear. My 17th birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a deadline. The day she could legally wash her hands of at least one of us. And since she couldn't keep one without the other, we both had to go. "Happy birthday, Liam," she'd said that morning, her voice thin and tight. She'd handed me a thick manila envelope, not a card. Inside wasn't money or a gift certificate. It was my birth certificate, my social security card, and $184 in cash. "This is the last of the state money for you," she'd explained, as if discussing a canceled subscription. "You're an adult now. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Her house, her rules. And her rule was that adults didn't live in her house for free. We had until 5 o'clock. It was 5:03. I looked down at our meager possessions. 2 duffel bags packed with the few clothes that were still ours, a backpack with our school books, a laughable inclusion now, and the small, worn wooden box our mom had given us years ago. "Whatever happens," she'd told me, her voice already weak, "don't lose this. It's the only thing that's really ours." Inside was a folded, yellow deed to our grandparents' farm upstate, a place we hadn't seen since we were little kids. Aunt Carol had always said it was worthless. "Tied up in liens, back taxes," she'd scoffed once. "The land's probably worth less than the debt. A ruin." A ruin sounded better than a sidewalk. "Where do we go, Liam?" Maya asked, and the tremble in her voice was the thing that finally broke through my shock. It lit a fire in the frozen pit of my stomach. Anger, hot and sharp. Not at the world, not at fate, but at the woman who had just turned off a light. "We're going home," I said, the words feeling strange and powerful in my mouth. I had no idea if it was true. I had no idea if the place was even still standing. But it was the only story I had to tell her, the only one that didn't end with us sleeping on a park bench. We walked away from that perfect, manicured lawn, from the streetlights that blinked on one by one in the gathering dark, and we didn't look back. The $184 felt like a feather in my pocket, light enough to blow away. It had to be enough. It had to get us to a ruin. The bus station was a purgatory of flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant failing to cover up years of desperation. We bought 2 one-way tickets to a town called Northwood, a place that was little more than a dot on the map near the property listed on the deed. The tickets took almost a third of our money. I bought 2 hot dogs from a vendor, and we ate them in silence, huddled together on a hard plastic bench, pretending they were the best thing we'd ever tasted. Maya fell asleep against my shoulder as the bus finally pulled out of the city, her breathing evening out into a soft, rhythmic puff. I stayed awake, watching the neat rows of suburban houses give way to strip malls, then to dark stretches of highway, and finally, to the skeletal silhouettes of trees against a bruised purple sky. Every mile felt like a victory and a terrifying leap into the unknown. I was 17 years old. I was the captain of a sinking ship with a crew of 2, and our only destination was a memory. I remembered the farm in flashes of sensory overload, the smell of sun-baked hay in the barn, the rough texture of the rope swing my grandfather had hung from a massive oak, the taste of my grandmother's blueberry pie, so sweet it made my teeth ache. It was a place of warmth and safety, a world away from Aunt Carol's sterile silence. But memories are liars. They round the sharp edges, paint over the rot. I had to be prepared for the ruin she'd promised us. The bus dropped us off at 3 a.m. in front of a closed gas station in Northwood. The town was asleep, buried under a blanket of profound silence. A light snow had begun to fall, the flakes dusting our hair and shoulders as we stood under the buzzing light of a single street lamp. The air was different here. Cleaner, colder, sharper. It smelled of pine and winter. The address on the deed was for a rural route 6 miles out of town. There were no taxis, no other buses. There was only walking. "Ready for a hike?" I asked Maya, trying to keep my voice light. She nodded, pulling her thin coat tighter. "As long as we're going somewhere." That was the thing, wasn't it? We were going somewhere. For the first time in 2 years, we weren't just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. We were moving toward something. Even if it was a pile of rubble, it was our pile of rubble. The walk was brutal. The snow got heavier, and the wind found every gap in our clothing. We walked on the shoulder of a dark, 2-lane road, the crunch of our footsteps the only sound for miles. I kept my arm around Maya, partly to shield her from the wind, partly to feel the solid, living warmth of her, a confirmation that we were still here, still together. My mind started playing tricks on me. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. The weight of my decision pressed down on me. I had dragged my sister into the middle of nowhere on the ghost of a chance, based on a piece of paper a bitter woman had called worthless. What if she was right? What if we got there and the house was gone, the barn a collapsed heap? What then? The $184 was now $120. Enough for a motel for 2 nights, maybe. And then what? The questions circled like vultures. Just when I felt the cold seeping into my bones, a deep, cellular cold that felt like giving up, Maya pointed. "Liam, look." Ahead of us, a rusted mailbox leaned precariously on its post, almost swallowed by overgrown bushes. On its faded side, I could just make out our last name, painted in letters that had once been white. A gravel driveway, more weed than gravel, disappeared into a thick stand of dark trees. We had arrived. The relief was so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. We turned onto the driveway, the trees closing in around us, their branches heavy with snow. It was like stepping into another world, a forgotten corner of time. And then the trees opened up, and we saw it. The farmhouse stood on a small rise, a dark, slumped shape against the snow-filled sky. Aunt Carol hadn't been entirely wrong. It was a ruin. The porch roof sagged like a broken jaw, windows were boarded up or shattered, and the paint had peeled away to reveal the bare, weathered gray wood beneath. It looked haunted, abandoned by everything, including hope. My heart sank. This wasn't a home. This was a tomb. "It's old," Maya said, her voice careful. "Yeah," I managed. "Old." We trudged closer, the snow up to our ankles. The front door was boarded shut. We walked around the side, our boots crunching on the frozen ground. Every part of the house looked just as bad as the front. I felt a wave of despair so strong it was nauseating. I had failed. I had brought us to the end of the line, and it was nothing. But then I saw the barn. It was set back from the house, a larger, sturdier structure. While the house seemed to be surrendering to gravity, the barn stood tall. Its deep red paint was faded, but mostly intact, and its roofline, though covered in snow, looked straight and strong. It was a building that had been made to last. It was made by my grandfather. He was a carpenter, a man who believed in solid foundations. "Let's check the barn," I said, a tiny flicker of something starting to burn in my chest again. "It looks better." The massive sliding door of the barn was stuck fast, frozen to the ground. We pushed and shoved, our breath coming in ragged clouds, but it wouldn't budge. We circled it, looking for another way in. On the far side, a smaller, normal-sized door was set into the wall. It had a heavy, rusted padlock on it, but the wood of the door frame around it was soft and rotten. I looked at Maya. She looked at me. No words were needed. I braced myself and kicked. The wood splintered with a satisfying crack. I kicked again, and the whole lock assembly tore away from the frame. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into a vast, cathedral-like darkness. The air inside was still and frigid, but it was out of the wind. It smelled of ancient hay, dust, and something else, something loamy and comforting, like rich earth. A few shafts of pale light filtered through gaps in the walls, illuminating swirling dust motes. The main floor was huge, mostly empty except for some rotting hay bales in one corner and a rusty skeletal tractor in another. High above us, the rafters were a complex web of shadows. It felt safe. It felt solid. "We can stay here," Maya said, her voice echoing in the huge space. "For tonight." "Yeah," I agreed, relief washing over me again. "We can make a space in the corner. It's dry at least." We dragged our bags to the driest-looking corner, away from a patch of roof where a slow drip, drip, drip of melting snow had started to fall. We unpacked the 2 thin blankets we'd brought. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over our heads. A roof our family had built. We sat huddled together for warmth, the silence of the barn pressing in. The initial adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. The reality of our situation was settling in. We were squatters in our own family's history. We had $120, a few days' worth of snacks, and no plan beyond surviving the night. I must have drifted off, because I woke to Maya shaking my shoulder. "Liam, what's that?" I sat up, my body stiff with cold. "What's what?" "That sound." I listened. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the dripping water. It was a low, rhythmic thumping sound. It seemed to be coming from beneath us. I put my ear to the wooden floorboards. The sound was clearer now. Thump. 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 It was deep, resonant. My first thought, wild and terrified, was that someone was down there. "It's just the house settling," I said, trying to sound convincing. "Or the wind under the floor." But it didn't sound like the wind. It sounded intentional. We both stared at the floorboards, wide-eyed in the dim light. The thumping stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The silence that followed was somehow heavier than before. We spent the rest of the night in a state of tense wakefulness, jumping at every creak of the old building. When the first gray light of dawn finally filtered through the cracks, it felt like a reprieve. The world outside was white and still, the snow having stopped sometime in the night. "I'm going to find where that sound came from," I declared, needing to do something to take control of some small part of our terrifying situation. Maya nodded, sticking close to me. We started in the corner where we'd heard the sound. The floorboards were thick, wide planks of old-growth timber, covered in a century of dust and grime. I stomped my foot, trying to replicate the sound. Nothing. We moved methodically across the floor, stomping and listening. It was near the center of the barn, directly under the highest point of the roof, that my stomp produced a different sound. Not a hollow echo, but a dull, solid thud. "Here," I said. We got on our hands and knees. I ran my fingers over the boards, feeling for a seam, a difference in texture. And then I found it. A symbol, carved into the wood, so faint it was almost invisible, was a small, stylized sparrow. My breath caught in my throat. It was our grandfather's mark. He used to carve it into the bottom of the furniture he made, a secret signature. He called Maya and me his sparrows because we were small and always chattering. "Grandpa's bird," Maya whispered, her finger tracing the carving. This wasn't random. This was a message. I took out the small pocket knife I always carried and worked the tip into the seam next to the carved board. The wood was tight. I pushed harder, gritting my teeth. The knife blade snapped. Frustrated, I looked around for a better tool. In the corner, a long, flat piece of iron, probably part of the old tractor, was lying on the ground. It was heavy and rusted, but it had a thin, flat edge. A perfect crowbar. I wedged it into the seam and put all my weight on it. The old wood groaned in protest. I pushed down harder, my muscles straining. With a sudden, loud crack, the board splintered and popped upward. Beneath it was not dirt or a crawl space. Beneath it was darkness. And a handle. A heavy, iron ring pull set flush into a square-cut section of the floor. It was a trap door. My heart was pounding now, a frantic drum against my ribs. The thumping sound. It couldn't have been a person. We were miles from anyone. It had to be something else. The wind catching something loose? A pressure change? It didn't matter. What mattered was what lay beneath this door. We looked at each other, a silent question passing between us. Were we brave enough to see this through? Maya gave a small, determined nod. That was all I needed. I gripped the cold iron ring with both hands and pulled. It was incredibly heavy. It felt like I was trying to lift the whole world. I grunted with the effort, my feet sliding on the dusty floor. "Let me help," Maya said, grabbing the ring beside me. Together we pulled. 1, 2, 3. Heave! The door lifted with a deep, scraping groan, the sound of wood sealed for a very long time. It was a solid, thick slab of oak, far heavier than the surrounding floorboards. As we swung it open and rested it against the floor, a wave of cool, dry air washed over us. It smelled clean, like stone and cedar and something else. Something like beeswax. We peered into the opening. A steep wooden ladder descended into perfect blackness. This was it. The moment where the story could turn into a horror movie. But the smell wasn't one of rot or dampness. It was a smell of preservation, of intention. "There's a lantern in my bag," I said, my voice hoarse. "The battery is good." I fetched the small camping lantern, my hands shaking slightly as I switched it on. Its bright LED beam cut a sharp white cone into the darkness below. It revealed a small, square room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were made of smooth, fitted stones, and the floor was clean-swept concrete. Against one wall was a simple wooden workbench. On the bench sat a heavy, dark green metal box. This wasn't a root cellar. It was a room. A hidden room. "Grandpa built this," Maya breathed, her eyes wide. "He built a secret room." I went first, swinging my legs over the edge and onto the ladder. The rungs were solid under my feet. The air grew cooler as I descended, but it was a dry, stable cold, not the damp chill of the barn above. I reached the bottom and shone the lantern around. It was more than just a room. It was a sanctuary. On shelves built into the stone walls were neat rows of glass jars filled with preserved fruits and vegetables. There were tins of biscuits, sealed containers of rice and beans, and several large corked jugs of what I assumed was water. In a corner, folded neatly on a wooden crate, were 2 thick wool blankets and several pillows. It was a survival bunker, a time capsule, a place for someone to hide, a place for someone to live. My light fell again on the workbench. It was a beautiful piece of furniture, the wood smooth and dark with oil. On its surface, next to the metal box, lay a single thick envelope. Written on it in our grandfather's familiar, elegant script were 2 words: "My sparrows." My hands trembled as I reached for it. The paper was thick and creamy, the seal unbroken. I carefully tore it open. Inside were several folded pages, covered in that same handwriting. Maya had followed me down the ladder, and now stood at my shoulder, her breath held tight in her chest. I unfolded the pages and began to read aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the stone chamber. "My dearest sparrows, Liam and Maya," it began. "If you are reading this, then the world has not been as kind to you as I would have wished. I am sorry for that. I am more sorry than you can ever know. I built this room for you. I built it with my own hands, stone by stone, board by board, in the hopes that you would never need it. Hope, it seems, is not always enough." I had to pause, my throat tightening. The words felt impossibly present, as if you were standing right there with us. Your parents, my beautiful daughter, and the fine man she married, were good people. They were trusting people, perhaps too trusting. There are snakes in this world that look like family, that smile at you across the dinner table while they poison your well. Your Aunt Carol and her husband, they were always jealous of your mother's spirit, of your father's kindness, of the love in your little house. They saw that love not as a treasure, but as a resource to be plundered. After I was gone, your grandmother and we worried. We saw the way things were heading, the bad investments your father was encouraged to make, the friendly loans that came with impossible terms. It was a slow, deliberate bleeding. We tried to help, but we were old, and our words didn't carry the weight they once did. So I did the only thing a man with a bad back and a good set of tools can do. I built a lifeboat. This room, this farm, it is your lifeboat. Carol will have told you it's worthless, that it's drowning in debt. It is a lie. The most important lie she has ever told you. I spent the last years of my life paying off every penny owed on this land. I put it into a trust, in your names, with a lawyer in town, a good man named Arthur Abernathy. The trust is ironclad. It cannot be touched, sold, or borrowed against until you, Liam, are 21, or you, Maya, are 18, whichever comes later. Until then, it is simply yours, to live on, to be safe on. Carol knows this. She has a copy of the paperwork. She has been collecting a stipend from the trust for your care for the last 2 years. The money, she said, came from the state? It came from this farm. From me. The letter slipped from my fingers. I stared at the stone wall, but I wasn't seeing it. I was seeing Aunt Carol's face, the tight, pursed lips, the constant complaints about money. All of it. A lie. A monstrous, calculated lie. She hadn't been burdened by us, she had been paid for us. Paid from our own inheritance while she made us feel like worthless charity cases. The $184 wasn't a final payment. It was an insult. Maya sank onto the wooden crate, her face pale. She stole from us. She did more than that, I said, the anger in my chest now a white-hot furnace. She tried to steal this, our home. I picked up the letter and continued reading, my voice shaking with rage. In the metal box you will find everything you need. The original trust documents, the deed, free and clear, the name and number for Mr. Abernathy. There is also some cash, not a fortune, but enough to get you started. Enough for seeds, for repairs, for a new generator. Enough to make this place live again. The rest is up to you. This land is good land. It will provide for you if you are good to it. Learn its rhythms. Respect its power. Know this, my sparrows. Your roots are deep in this soil. This place is not a ruin. It is a foundation. What has been broken can be mended. What has been neglected can be nurtured. The work will be hard. There will be days you want to give up. On those days, I want you to remember that you are the grandchildren of a woman who could coax roses from stone and a man who knew how to build things that last. You are not defined by the people who tried to throw you away. You are defined by what you choose to build. Be good to each other. Be brave. I love you always. Your grandpa. Tears were streaming down Maya's face. I wasn't crying. The anger was too hot for tears. It had burned them away, leaving behind a hard, clear certainty. We were not homeless. We were home. I walked over to the workbench and placed my hands on the cold metal of the box. It was heavy, solid, real. There was a small, simple lock on it, and taped to the underside of the workbench was a key. I unlocked it and lifted the lid. Inside, just as the letter promised, was a thick stack of documents in a waterproof pouch. Beneath that were stacks of cash, bundled in paper bands. It wasn't a king's ransom, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was a future. It was a fighting chance. For a long time, we just sat there, in the quiet, cool air of our grandfather's secret room, the lantern casting a steady, warm glow on our faces. The world outside, the cold, the snow, Aunt Carol, it all seemed very far away. Down here, surrounded by the proof of our grandfather's love and foresight, the fear began to recede. It was replaced by something new, something fierce and fragile all at once. Hope. But it was a complicated hope. We had the truth. We had the means to survive. But what did we do now? The letter gave us a foundation, but we had to decide what to build on it. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where the whole world shifts on its axis, where a truth you've been told your whole life is revealed to be a lie. It's terrifying, but it's also freeing. It's the moment you realize the map you've been given is worthless, and you have to draw your own. If you've ever felt that, I want you to let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and I think it's important for us to know we're not alone in these moments of terrifying discovery. This community, it's built for people who have had to find their own way. Back in that room, the choice felt enormous. We could take the money and run, disappear, start a new life in a new city where no one knew us, where the ghosts of our past couldn't find us. It was tempting. It was the easy path. No fighting, no lawyers, no facing the woman who had betrayed us so completely. We could just leave it all behind. The farm, the memories, the pain. We could go to California, Maya said softly, voicing the thought. Get an apartment. You could finish school. I looked at her, at the hope and fear warring in her eyes. I looked around the room, at the neatly stacked jars, the carefully folded blankets, the sturdy workbench. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a promise. A last will and testament written not in legal jargon, but in stone and wood and love. Our grandfather hadn't built this place so we could run. He'd built it so we could stand our ground. He didn't want us to run, Maya, I said. He wanted us to fight. This place, this is ours. She's not just a liar, she's a thief. She stole our money, she stole our home, she stole our story. We can't let her get away with it. A look of resolve hardened Maya's soft features. She wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand and stood up. Okay, she said, her voice stronger now. What do we do first? The first thing we did was practical. We brought the blankets and some of the preserved food up to the barn. We found an old wood-burning stove in a corner, rusted but intact. I spent the better part of the day cleaning it out and checking the flue. We found a stack of dry, seasoned wood in a lean-to behind the barn, and by nightfall, we had a small, crackling fire going in the stove. For the first time, a real, radiating warmth pushed back the biting cold. We ate canned peaches and biscuits from the hidden room, sitting on an old hay bale in front of the fire. It was the best meal of my life. The next day, we took a small portion of the cash and walked the 6 miles back into town. Northwood was a different place in the daylight. It was small, quiet, and a little worn around the edges, but it felt real. People nodded as we passed. We bought supplies, a cheap burner phone, heavy socks, work gloves, instant noodles, and coffee. Basic things. The tools of a new life. The last stop was a small office on the town's main street with a faded sign that read, Arthur Abernathy, Attorney at Law. My heart was pounding as I opened the door. The office was cluttered with books and files, and it smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. A man who must have been in his late 60s looked up from behind a mountain of paperwork. He had kind eyes behind thick glasses and a fringe of white hair. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a gravelly baritone. "Are you Mr. Abernathy?" I asked, my voice barely a squeak. "The one and only. And you are?" "I'm Liam. This is my sister, Maya. Our grandfather was... He was a client of yours. He said you held a trust for us." Mr. Abernathy's eyebrows shot up. He studied our faces, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Good heavens," he said, leaning forward. "You have your mother's eyes. Both of you. I heard you were living with your aunt downstate. What in the world are you doing here?" I took a deep breath and placed the waterproof pouch with the trust documents on his desk. "It's a long story," I said, "and I think you're the only person who can help us." We spent the next 2 hours in his office. We told him everything. About my birthday, about Aunt Carol kicking us out, about finding the hidden room and the letter. At first, he listened with a calm, professional demeanor. But as the story unfolded, his expression shifted from sympathy to shock, and then to a slow-burning, righteous anger. When I told him about the stipend she'd been collecting, he stood up and began pacing the small office, muttering under his breath. "That woman," he finally said, stopping and pointing a finger at the documents on his desk. "I had my suspicions. The calls were always about money. She fought me on every expenditure for you kids, trying to get more cash released to her directly. I blocked her as much as the trust language would allow, but I never imagined she would commit fraud. And then throw you out like garbage." He sat back down, his face grim. "Your grandfather was a smart man. He saw her for what she was. This trust," he said, tapping the papers, "is a work of art. It's bulletproof. She has no claim on this land, and she has committed a serious crime by misappropriating the trust funds and abandoning her legal wards." "So what happens now?" Maya asked. "Now," Mr. Abernathy said, a grim smile touching his lips, "we fight back. I'll file an emergency petition with the court first thing tomorrow morning to have you declared emancipated minors and grant you provisional control of the property. Then, I'm going to contact your aunt's lawyer and inform them that we are aware of the fraudulent activity. She's going to find her life is about to get very, very complicated." Leaving his office felt like stepping out into a different world. The sky seemed brighter, the air less cold. We weren't just 2 kids hiding in a barn anymore. We had an ally. We had the law on our side. We had a plan. The next few months were a blur of hard work and legal maneuvering. Mr. Abernathy was as good as his word. A blizzard of legal papers flew back and forth. Aunt Carol, through her lawyer, denied everything at first. Then, faced with the undeniable proof of the trust documents and bank records Mr. Abernathy subpoenaed, she tried to claim we were delinquent and unmanageable. It was a desperate, ugly fight. But we had the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, is a powerful thing. While the lawyers fought, Maya and I worked. We moved out of the barn and into the hidden room. It became our headquarters, our refuge. It was small and windowless, but it was warm, dry, and safe. Every day, we would emerge and tackle a new project on the farm. We started with the house. It was a daunting task. We cleared out the trash and debris, patched the broken windows with plywood, and fixed the leak in the roof. We learned to be plumbers, electricians, and carpenters, guided by old manuals we found in the workshop and our grandfather's steadying voice in his letters. He had left more than one. Tucked away in the metal box were dozens of them, each one a lesson. One on how to mend a fence. One on how to plant a winter garden. One on how to read the sky to predict the weather. And one, simply, on how to forgive but never forget. The physical labor was grueling. My hands, once soft, became calloused and rough. My muscles ached in ways I never knew they could. But every repaired board, every cleared field was a victory. We were literally rebuilding our lives with our own two hands. We were taking a ruin and breathing life back into it. We started to meet the locals. A gruff old farmer named Henderson from down the road stopped by one day, curious about the smoke coming from our chimney. He looked at us, two kids covered in grime, and then at the work we were doing. He didn't say much, just grunted and said, "Your grandpa was a good man. If you need to borrow a tractor, just ask." The woman at the feed store gave us a discount. The man at the hardware store showed me how to properly fix a sagging door frame. Slowly, cautiously, we were becoming part of the community. They weren't replacing our family, but they were a network, a quiet web of support that we hadn't realized we were so desperate for. One evening in early spring, as the last of the snow was melting and the first green shoots were pushing through the cold earth, we got a call from Mr. Abernathy. "It's over," he said, his voice tired but triumphant. "She's agreed to settle. She's going to pay back every cent she took from the trust, and she will sign away any and all future claims. In return, we agree not to press criminal charges for fraud and abandonment." I looked at Maya, who was watching me, her face anxious. I put the phone on speaker. "Why wouldn't we press charges?" I asked, the anger still a hot coal in my gut. "Because, Liam," Mr. Abernathy said gently, "sometimes the best victory isn't about punishment. It's about peace. You have the farm. You have your future. You can spend the next few years looking back, mired in court battles and anger, or you can look forward and build your life. Your grandfather didn't want you to have a life of anger. He wanted you to have a life of purpose. The choice is yours." I thought about it. I thought about all the hate and bitterness that had poisoned our lives for 2 years. Did I want to hold on to that? Or did I want to let it go and focus on the good things we were building? I looked at the small patch of winter greens we had managed to grow in a makeshift cold frame. I looked at the solid, repaired roof of our house. I looked at my sister, whose face was no longer pinched with fear, but smudged with dirt and glowing with pride. "We'll take the deal," I said. And just like that, it was done. The farm was ours, unquestionably, unequivocally, ours. We didn't celebrate with a party. We celebrated by taking 2 lawn chairs from the barn and setting them on the rickety front porch of the house. We sat there as the sun went down, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We watched the stars come out in the clear, cold sky. We didn't say much. We just sat there, breathing in the smell of damp earth and new beginnings. We were home. That hidden room, It saved us. But not in the way you might think. Yes, it gave us shelter from the cold. Yes, the money it held was a lifeline. But its real gift was the truth. It gave us back our story. We weren't the unwanted orphans, the charity cases, the kids who got kicked out. We were the heirs to a legacy of love and resilience. We were the sparrows our grandfather had built a fortress for. The room became more than just a shelter. It became the heart of our new life. The workbench is where I learned to love the feel of wood, to shape it into something useful and beautiful, just like my grandfather did. Maya set up a corner for her studies, and eventually, her art. It was our quiet place, our planning room, our library of our grandfather's wisdom. It was a physical reminder that even in the darkest of times, someone, somewhere, might have built a light for you, hoping you'd one day find the switch. Life isn't easy now. The house is still a work in progress. Money is still tight. There are scars that will never fully fade. But every morning, I wake up and I see the sunrise over my own fields. I work on my own land. I am building a future for my sister and me, a future on a foundation of truth. We took a ruin and we are making it a home, and that is a gift beyond measure. If our story teaches you anything, I hope it's this. You are not defined by the circumstances you are thrown into. You are not the labels people try to put on you. You are the builder. You have the power to take the broken pieces and create something new, something strong, something that is truly yours. Sometimes, you just have to be willing to pry up the floorboards and see what's been hidden underneath. Your story matters. The struggles you faced, the truths you've uncovered, the life you are trying to build, it all matters. If you feel comfortable, share a piece of your story in the comments below. Let us know about a time you had to build your own foundation. And if you want to be a part of this community, a place for people who understand that the most important work is the work we do on ourselves, then please hit that subscribe button. You are welcome here.